This is a trigger warning, as the following podcast has descriptions of scenes involving sexual violence, mutilation, and drug abuse.
Yes, I'm coming. Ah, hello. Come in. I am Yesteris, keeper of the sacred library. You must be here about the tiny bookcase. Then follow me. I've sent 2 adventurers out to find stories. So join me here by my crystal ball, and let us see where they are now.
I swear that bloke just dipped a biscuit in his beer.
I wouldn't put it past this town.
Is that your magic noise?
Oh yeah, that's Yesteris, the wizard.
Whose navel is that?
Oh yeah, he's pretty tall.
Lift it up.
Or what's this place called then?
This is the Screaming Beaver.
Who is this giant?
I'm Declan Khan.
A Khan? Finally, someone of royal lineage.
I'm not a Khan. Well, I am a Khan, technically.
He's a musician.
And a radio presenter.
Something of an actor.
And a comedian.
That seems a bit much.
All of that, is he? What about a storyteller?
You can do something, I'm sure. Ben, you open this one up. This time you wanted Wonderland.
And Wonderland he shall have. Wonderland. Caroline was beginning to grow tired of having utterly nothing to do during lockdown as she lay on the sofa. She had peeked in at her brother's video games, but they appeared to be nothing but helmeted heads exploding in grey-brown landscapes. Her father was typically working on his next project, leaving the previous 3 works in progress to languish and take up space in the garage. Her mother, it has to be said, was always switched on. Several phones and multiple laptops hummed with 100 browser tabs, all plugged in, all radiating heat, and the possibility that an inscrutable yet vital alarm might go off to indicate a meeting or deadline. Caroline opened the French windows in an attempt to cool the living room down. The day outside was sticky and still. A wall of heated air flounced past her into the room. She could feel her shirt sticking to her already, and felt ready to scream as the intolerable boredom merged with the irritating heat. Then she saw it. An old box with once colourful artwork sat amongst the family board games. The edges looked like they had been repaired with tape at least once. The yellowing stuff was merely a memory of sticky strength, and as she took the box down from the shelf, one corner popped open. Ugh. Caroline half moaned, half growled. She placed the box down on the drop-leaf table and looked at it. The artwork was faded but intriguing. It looked like one of those old Victorian political cartoons, and was seemingly given life by the splashes of muted watercolour. The subject matter was intensely odd. All manner of creatures and odd beings struck characterful poses against a fantastical background. Above them, in solid black lettering, was the word Wonderland. It took an hour to bully, barter, and badger her family to the table. She had laid the game out after swinging up both ends of the drop-leaf table and placing the comfortable heavy chairs around it. Despite owning many board games, they had not played one together as a family for years. Her father was flicking through the aged rules booklet. His frown told her that he was intending to uncover the mysteries of the game before touching a single piece. Her brother was pouring himself some white wine. The bottle was sweating so much in the heat that the label had begun to slough downward. It was early, but she didn't want to push her luck by poking about it. Her mother hurried into the room and put her phones down around her after checking each one in turn. Caroline smiled at her and got a warm one in return. So, I think we have to pick one of these silly little pieces each. The heat had clearly put an edge on her dad's anxiety, so Caroline allowed the phrasing to slip past unnoticed, like a fart during movie night. Her brother Martin, however, chuckled quietly. Sensing the tension, her mum sat up straight and beamed a look of happy engagement. It was only partially marred by the obvious stress of her job looming over her like a dark cloud. Right, okay, said Mum. I'll be the rabbit. She held it up to her face and in a high-pitched voice said, I'm late! I'm late! Caroline and Martin laughed, a little, but the truth was the imitation struck a chord of uneasiness in both of them. I'll yoink the caterpillar. Look at that fat pipe. Caroline, you be the cat. It's got your teeth. Martin giggled to himself. I guess that leaves me with this thing. Dad peered at the piece in his hand. That's the dodo, Dad. Yippee. What a curious game, said Mum brightly as she glanced at the board. The first few turns proceeded easily enough. Dice clattered across the table, occasionally upsetting components of the game, and they all had to wait as Dad reset them carefully with groaning complaints. As a family, they found ways through tiny doors and stayed afloat in a pool of tears. It all began to go wrong with the caucus race. What do you mean that doesn't win the race? That's a double six! This game doesn't make any fucking sense! Dad stood up abruptly and left the room. Caroline felt cold in her stomach, and she could see the rules booklet was shaking in her hands. Dad returned quickly with a beer and sat down without any sign that he had stormed off. With no winnings to be had from the race, and no interpretation of the rules that allowed them to find a way to end the section of play, Mum suggested that they move on to the next round of the game. As they did so, one of the phones in front of her vibrated on the table. She plucked it up with the same alacrity a drowning man might pick up a cup of water. Hi. No, of course, yes, that needs to happen before the circular goes out. Mum's eyes flicked up at all of them. Around the table, different flavours of frown could be seen. Speaking again into her phone, she said, Yes, I'll message you shortly. Bye. She looked around the table again. So, what's next? Caroline explained that during this round, the little girl had become a giant once more and needed to be freed from a house, and as such, they all needed to decide, in turn order, which of their cards to play face down before revealing them at the same time. You first, Dad. He peered at the cards in his hand and placed one down like a poker player, laying a winning hand. Caroline played her own card next, trying not to look at the sneering smirk on her dad's face. Martin followed suit, and then gasped. Oh, bugger. That's the wrong one. Can I take it back? Of course not, said Dad. As the two of them argued, Caroline watched her mum pick up one of the other phones and begin typing rapidly. The intense focus she witnessed twitched something within her. It felt like a spring coiling around that cold feeling she had been unable to shake. Your turn, Mum. Oh, is it? Sorry. Here, is that okay? Said Mum as she picked a card at random and placed it down. Caroline flipped all the cards. On each was a rose bush, dripping with a different colour paint, aside from Mum's, which appeared to be a true bush of red roses. Yeah. That trumps everyone else's by a long way. What? Shouted Dad. Oh no, sorry. That is the point of the game, Mum, said Caroline. There's a point to this game? Chimed in Dad. Martin chuckled as he poured the last of the bottle into his glass. Next round, said Caroline, who was beginning to feel like she should have just stayed on the sofa. Next round, we are all given these pieces of a poem, and we have to unjumble the words and swap pieces with each other until one of us can make the full poem. This game is fucking nuts. Martin reached for his glass, but instead managed to knock it over. The pale wine flushed over the board and off the edge, straight into Caroline's lap. Mum leapt up and grabbed at her phones. One skittered away from her and fell on the floor. She began to crawl around looking for it. Dad rolled his eyes back into his head and growled with purely suppressed frustration. Caroline wasn't aware of it, but she had been conditioned by times like this throughout her life, conditioned to be quiet, helpful, and bright. She was done being all of those things. She stood and scooped up the deck of cards. Enough! With that, she hurled the deck forwards, the cards splayed outward like pellets from a shotgun. They rained down over her shocked family and all over the living room. Some clung to the wine-slicked table, and others disappeared down the back of the sofa. Caroline took a panting breath. It's just a fucking game!
I really liked that, man.
I'm glad.
I guess it's because of the problem. I kept expecting like some crazy thing to happen, but it was really nice to just get a little slice of
life.
reality.
It was tense. I've been in situations like that, and I'm like, oh, this is going to kick off.
Do you know what it was? It was every single one of us having played Monopoly at some point with our family, right?
Yes.
That's not how free parking works!
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously, none of those people are actually directly representative of any of my family members in particular.
It's not true.
Disclaimer.
I've met them.
But yeah, no, it's that thing, isn't it? Like that, just sort of tension around a family board game night that you just don't really have when you're playing with friends. Like sometimes you do, especially after 10 beers.
We all tend to be actively interested in board games in our group anyway, so it makes it slightly better. Like that whole thing of haranguing your family into playing a board game does elicit a different response.
Definitely.
A big part of playing board games with family, I think, is you're trying to, a lot of the time, this may just be me, but it's finding a way to connect that often family members struggle to do. And you don't get that with friends because, if we're not having fun, we'll just sack it off. But when it's family, it gets tense. And when it gets tense, everyone is annoyed that this is not going the way it should be and we don't love each other anymore.
Especially when it's hot and there's alcohol involved.
Oh, yeah. You actually told me, because we did some, obviously when we write, we talk to each other about what we're writing, and you said that you did loads of research into Lewis Carroll.
Well, loads of research is possibly a bit much.
More research in Lewis Carroll than you did into... I mean, you already know what it's like to be hot, because it is 3,000 degrees right now.
It's really fucking hot.
In the last 48 hours, we've played 3 different
board games.
Yep. But was it... So you obviously took Alice in Wonderland from Wonderland, and then was it something about Lewis Carroll that led you down the route you ended up on, or?
Well, I think he was sort of quite famous for he was a mathematician and an inventor and stuff as well. He invented a few ciphers, and so he had an interesting mind that I think he would have really engaged with board gaming.
Yeah.
So I sort of connected it through that way, really. And I've got so many games where they're kind of crap, but they've overlaid an IP that I love onto it, and then somehow I keep playing them despite the fact that they're not particularly mechanically strong. The game that I described in that sounds shit.
Oh yeah,
it's got dice mechanics in one round, card mechanics in another one. It appears to play a little bit like Ludo possibly and Monopoly. What is that game? And it was so I wanted it to be a kind of shit game.
Yeah.
That would even annoy Lewis Carroll.
I was legitimately thinking, I wonder if he's going to get to a turtle soup, the mock turtle soup round. I wanted to. How does it play?
I wanted to play with so obviously each piece that's taken.
Yeah.
Is representative of what is a bit like the person that's taken it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then there's 4 sections of the story that are not modelled on, but take inspiration from chapters of the book.
Yeah.
The first book. So yeah, it was sort of it felt less like writing a short story from the gut, we've had the one for Under the Ice.
Yeah.
That just kind of came roaring out of the back of my brain. This felt more like I was engaging with something that I was already very aware of, and I was, as I say, doing almost like a writing exercise, modelling it.
Yeah.
But it didn't have any emotional connection, which is why I turned it into this really unpleasant family encounter, which I happily have a depth of knowledge in.
You did. It felt like there was backstory with the family, the way people were reacting. It felt like everyone in the family was like, "Oh, here we go again." X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And it was impressive how that came across without there being any backstory in the story.
Yeah. I think that's just because I carry my own shit around with me all the time.
You showed, not told.
There we go, yeah. Show not tell.
The correct way.
Oh.
They keep telling us that.
They do.
Stop telling us! Start showing us.
Have you got us a story?
Yeah, go on. I'll read you a story. A long, low whistle escaped from Todd's lips as he cast his eyes over what he could only describe as concentrated childhood. Wonderland, where all your dreams come true. When he had been a boy, and admittedly that was some years ago now, this had been the most incredible place on earth. It had waltzer cars that would spin you into a seizure-inducing state of nausea, high-flying roller coasters where every bump under your wheels of your carriage felt like a potential flight, and a 3-ring circus that, up until the officials stepped in, was a cavalcade of delights. Todd fondly remembered the ringmaster, Mr. Wonder, a gruff man in his 40s. As the years had gone on, the man's broad gestures to the crowd had changed, with every loss of a digit to their manic chimps. An almost mirthless chuckle escaped Todd's lips as he remembered watching Mr. Wonder's wedding ring, and the finger that filled it, disappear into the crimson-soaked mouth of Bobo, a grizzled silverback crisscrossed with whip scars. It was the first time he'd heard anyone except his pa cussing. "You motherfucker!" The top hat had flown off comically at this point. The shrieks of the chimp, its eyes wild and its genitals engorged, had seemed louder even than the screams of the crowd that a 12-year-old Todd had watched from. He had achieved his first proper erection then. Not the half-hearted blood filling that assailed every young man around that age, but a firm rod. It had swollen painfully against the front seam of his jeans, delighting him even further. The ringmaster drawing his snub-nosed pistol from under the comically long tails of his red coat, and blowing a hole the size of a walnut in the front of Bobo's face, which had subsequently blown a hole the size of a cantaloupe in the back of Bobo's head, had been the tipping point that sent Todd's first orgasm pumping rhythmically out of his shaft. With each desperate squirt, he felt the movement in his urethra push harder against the coarse stitching in his jeans. He had never felt so alive. Walking through the park, as he did now, he heard the jangling music of the merry-go-round drifting across his subconscious. He could smell the freshly popped corn, and hear the men calling out, trying to draw you to their attraction. Drop them a nickel and take the adventure of a lifetime. It was always the same adventure out here, but not there. Not in the big top. That was where his feet led him now, as though the path was being walked for him, not by him. The canvas was no longer the bright cherry red of decades past. The sun had exacted a toll, leaving the thing weathered and pale. The large flap that served as the entrance for normal folk, those without the bright makeup of a clown or the glimmering spandex of an acrobat, was flapping loosely in the breeze, but had surprising weight when Todd moved to open it. Putting down the large bag, he used both hands to swing the thing open, then resting the weight of it across a shoulder, dragged his load inside. Just being in there began to stir something in him. The twitch of an unprompted movement in his loins sending a shiver of delight down his spine. Dropping the bag unceremoniously, a groan seeped from it, like water from a sponge. This was finally going to be it. He had thought, for a long time, he would be able to recreate the sensation by using other animals. He had gently pried apart the neighbour's cats and tugged at himself until a weak spurt of semen fell onto the desecrated remains. The thrill was never as much. Sure, the feeling of the still-warm blood on his hands coating him was something. That rich smell of iron being cut through by the musky stench of his load was always a delight. But soon cats, dogs, and farm animals were almost nothing to him. He had made phone calls and searched through want ads, but it didn't seem like he was going to be able to buy a chimpanzee. That had been a hard pill to swallow. The sadness that filled him became a poison, and that night he found himself hurting a girl. Her name had been Brandy. She was a streetwalker who told him he had baby doll eyes. He smashed her head with her own horseshoe, the ludicrous point at the back of it piercing her temple like a Roman spear into the side of Christ himself, and she began shrieking. In the moments before she died, like an enraged animal. His ejaculate had sprung forth with reasonable vigour then, and he began to hatch a plan. The first few attempts had died too quickly. His work was haphazard. He normally started with the hands. It was the thumbs. They were all wrong. Best to snap them back and bind them real tight so they jutted out, just like a chimp's. He enjoyed this part of his work, especially as he became practiced at it. He bound their legs so that they became bowed. On one of the girls, he tried to shorten them, taking off her feet first, with the intention of sewing them back where her knees were. The feet had begun to rot almost immediately, sending a poison into her blood. That was a shame. She was shaping up nicely. It wasn't until this girl, the recesses of his mind told him Melissa, that he had made it to the hardest part of his vision. He had bound her legs and snapped her thumbs, taking the time to file her teeth the right way. He had kept her for a time in a crate so she couldn't stand fully, until her shape began to twist into that of his desire. He had carefully sliced away her breasts, stitching the body closed into a flatter, more desirable shape. Finally, he had achieved the last step of his divine art. With a Stanley knife, he had cut away the bulbous, fleshy portion of her nose, leaving a flatter, more ape-like opening. She had howled and shrieked when he did this. which only made it easier. With a swift motion, he unzipped the body bag and tipped her from it. She emerged dazed and frightened, a vision of beauty. His mind's eye filled the room with screaming folk, and he threw his arms wide in a practiced motion, sending his ringmaster tails flapping. His hard cock pressed achingly against the fabric swaddling him, and he groaned before dragging the girl to her feet. She began to panic. It was delightful. That look of animal confusion on her face, every drop his ambrosia. He forced a finger into her mouth and waited for her instincts to kick in. Blessedly they did, and her filed teeth sank easily through the meat and between the bones. His finger was in her mouth. His tiny stump spurted blood all over her visage. With a heaving cough she choked, his hot blood pumping into her open nasal cavity, warring with her inability to swallow the thick digit she'd severed. Her last thoughts weren't even of escape. They were panic, confusion, fear. Her wild eyes were everything he'd ever dreamed of. Drawing the snub-nosed pistol from under his tails, Todd took deliberate aim before devastating the poor girl's skull. With the compression of the trigger, semen burst from the tip of his penis, coating the inside seam that had rubbed an orgasmic welt into him with thick globules of hot cum. This sent trickles of steam floating out from him in the cold night air. With a relaxed sigh, Todd put the gun under his chin and squeezed the trigger, sending his bliss scattering around the big top. At Wonderland, where all your dreams come true.
Oh, that was disgustingly unhinged, Nick. That was truly foul. But, yeah. I'll tell you what it reminded me of. It reminded me of...
You've read something else like this?
I have, yeah. J.G. Ballard's Crash.
Yeah.
The people, the way that he describes like people, it's autophilia.
Yeah.
The way that they describe that, like cum hitting the windscreen as the crash happens and that kind of thing.
So this
It's
is
like-
the part where we defend this by pointing out other famous authors who've written things similar.
I'll not defend the content of that story because that was gross as fuck, man. Yeah, we could cast some big words at it, dress it up, but that was pretty foul stuff, man.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, beautifully written.
When I honestly started writing it, I didn't know where it was gonna go. And then I was like, the chimp bites the guy's finger off. What if that made him come? And it just got worse.
Oh.
I'm glad it's out of my system.
I think the whole world is, because otherwise we might start to worry.
I mean, reading it back, yeah, probably a bit intense. a little bit much.
Well, I'm sure we'll certainly see from our audience
I was going to say,
what they make of that one.
from reading it in front of you guys, it was really good fun at the beginning before it got dark, listening to you laugh
Oh, yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah, I think it was the moment when the violence started happening to the women that we stopped laughing.
I just didn't want to interrupt you.
Oh, dear.
Good grief.
The Roman spear through the side of Christ was a lovely touch.
Yes,
Oh.
yeah, no, I need to get a bit of Jesus in there.
There was you always do. Loads of really nice writing flourishes, and
Thank you.
it wouldn't work to describe that in a guttural way. You have to do it in quite with highfalutin language.
Highfalutin.
Highfalutin. We may have watched some westerns this week.
We have.
Yeah, no, I really liked it. Nick. But I never want to hear it again.
You're going to read it to him in bed tonight, gang. We need a story from Declan soon, but I think it's boiling hot. Should we grab some beer?
Yeah.
So we have just grabbed some beer. We're drinking Piston Head, which is very nice.
and it's really cold, which is appreciated.
So cold.
We all wanted to cleanse our palates and hopefully drink enough to delete the memory of what just happened.
Oh.
To be fair, I had that plan before I even arrived.
Yeah. This is interesting for anyone listening. This is the first time we've actually been able to record in person because of lockdown. So rather than drinking sad on our own, we're drinking together, which makes it socially acceptable.
These may also be released in a different order as well.
Yes.
So, yeah.
We could have some lockdown ones after this, which would be interesting. See, depends how we feel.
Whew. It's still rattling around in my head, man. It's as you said, like pure nightmare fuel.
It's vivid, certainly.
Very vivid, yeah. Very vivid. Is that even a thing?
Very vivid.
Not really, is it?
Couldn't something not be very vivid?
No, I think it's an absolute, isn't it? You can't really quantify it.
As my father always says, you can't get a little bit pregnant. It's a bit like that.
Yeah.
Temporary is not the same as a little bit.
You could be more pregnant and less pregnant, according to women.
What?
You're pregnant or you're not?
Well, I've never heard a man go, "Oh, she's very pregnant," but I hear it a lot from women.
Okay, all right. Like you hit like in sort of like a she's about to pop kind of way.
Yes.
Heavily. You say heavily pregnant.
Yeah, well, you hear that probably more.
I tell you the one I don't like. When people say, "Oh, it's very unique." You can't be very unique. It's either unique or it isn't.
Yeah.
As they said in the Rugrats, exactly the same but different. Right. Let's have a palate cleanser, which this probably won't be. Declan, do you have a story for us?
Of course I do. Dave had never seen a blackness quite so colourful. A void that seemed to twinkle and shrink in a kaleidoscope of noise. He was beginning to wake from a sudden punch to the brain, kindly administered by a newfound friend. Enough of the fuzz eventually cleared to reveal that, after however much time had passed, his acquaintance was still perched on a rusted mound and smoking heavily enough to ground all flights within a 5-mile radius. There was, however, one slight difference Dave couldn't quite put his finger on. He wondered if the chap didn't have a few more arms than he remembered, but he was having such a hard time counting them that he couldn't be sure. What he was sure about was that this man of indeterminate limbs had used one of them to hand him a tidbit of indeterminate nutritional value, one that had seemingly bypassed the stomach and gone barreling straight to the head. Dinner was served, and it came with its own show. The restaurant was some kind of small wooden shack, illuminated only by a tiny bucket of flickering embers. His myriapodal maitre d' was ignoring him. The walls themselves seemed to be heaving, the rotting slats twisting and squirming in a pulpy paso doble. Dave felt it was all getting a bit awkward, so he decided to leave. He scrambled around a bit, looking for an egress, but none was forthcoming. He started to panic. Smokey Robinson wasn't being any help. There was nothing for it but to try and pry a gap between the contorting timber of the walls. Outside, 2 men were in the middle of a bloody brawl when they saw a man suddenly come bursting through a nearby wall in a shower of fragmented wood, screaming incoherently. They stopped, staring, one maintaining his headlock on the other. Dave stopped screaming and froze, gaping at this monstrous, 2-faced creature towering over him in the gloom. The creature untangled itself and split into 2 indistinguishable hulks, one of which spoke. "Bit too hot in the hot box, was it?" Dave continued to stare. He didn't understand the question, or much of anything. Then the other mass spoke. "The Doobie Brothers smoked you out, did he?" Dave tried to process what was being said, but was getting distracted by what was saying it. "Not one for conversation, are you? Would have thought you and him would get on like a house on fire." The first hulk chuckled as if this was peak humour. "Nah, I reckon they'd get on well, 'cause neither of them speak much," said the other. "That's what I just said, shit for brains," the first bulk replied. "Nah, house fires are bad. Remember that old lady? What's her name? She had one last year. She didn't get on very well after that. She died." "Oh, shut up, Pillock,"
You can have your pissing doll. Dave noticed for the first time what appeared to be a child, lying limp and lifeless on the dusty concrete, its limbs splayed awkwardly. The second man picked it up by its neck and thrust its face towards Dave's. "He's called Billy," the second man said gleefully. Dave's entire field of vision was replaced with a wide grin and two huge, black, soulless eyes. He felt something in his brain pop as he resisted falling into the void. The second man seemed disappointed in Dave's lack of reaction. "Here, do you reckon he's blind? He just keeps staring blankly, all glazed over like." His twin mused. "Nah, you know what? I reckon he's deaf. He's looking at us, but it's like he can't tell what we're saying." The second man manipulated the doll's mouth and spoke in a high voice. "Oi, is you blind or is you deaf?" "You prat," the first man snapped. "He's deaf, right? So he'd have to lip read. You can't lip read a dummy. It'd just be going ma 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 to him. Now see, Billy's got his big grin, right? So his lips don't touch. He'd be going na 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 na. No, fuck you. You need a tongue to go na 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 na. Billy ain't got a tongue. Up yours, dickhead." The two behemoths collided and returned to their brawl. They seemed to grow before Dave's eyes, forming a gargantuan mass of writhing fat and limbs. Billy was thrown to the ground, landing at Dave's feet. The eyes bored a hole into Dave's soul as the lower jaw separated from the rest of the grin. Dave was losing his mind, but he found his legs. He ran. Dave still had no idea where he was or where he was going. His surroundings seemed to fade from the blackness as he passed, as if struggling with the effort to materialize. They needn't have bothered, as each structure he passed was as alien and indistinct as the last. A soft glow began to seep through into his vision, and as he followed it, a stinging stench of burning rubber and hot piss introduced itself. It was heat and light. It wasn't pleasant, but it was familiar. Dave gained a second wind and sprinted towards the source. He turned a corner and was immediately dazzled by a blinding light that seared a hole straight into his frontal lobe. The force of it knocked him to the ground. He heard laughter. "What's the hurry, my son?" As Dave shielded his eyes, he heard sycophantic jeers and felt the heat of nearby flames. "He's had it, he has. Proper banjacks, I reckon." His eyes began to adjust, and he could make out figures through the green and purple haze. Creatures were perched on various chunks of debris. Some had stripes, others had fur. One had long ears, which were approaching him. "Up you get, my love." It was a female voice, reassuringly friendly. With help, Dave stood and surveyed the party. The group was sat in a semicircle around a towering inferno, and sat highest among them in the centre was a man in a large, worn leather armchair. He wore a large hat and several upturned collars. He was clearly the master of this braying menagerie, like a lion tamer who had diversified. Out of the frying pan into the fire, Dave thought, though at least the fire seemed to belong to someone vaguely human. The vague human beckoned. "Come and have a drink, mate." That offer seemed friendly enough, even if met with more jeering from the entourage, and Dave realised he was indeed getting very thirsty. The ringleader poured an amber liquid from a plastic bottle into a chipped mug and offered it to him. Dave gulped it down as the crowd sniggered. It was warm and fizzy, and it stung the back of his throat like hot sick. "That's good, is it?" Dave nodded politely. "Let him have some of this," said the kind lady voice. She filled his mug with a clear liquid from a tall glass bottle. What Dave really wanted was some water, but he suspected this wasn't. It burned. He felt the hole in the front of his brain start to tear. "What's your name, hon?" asked the lady with the long ears. Those ears were stirring something inside him, and the drink seemed to be giving him courage. As he lost his inhibition, he found his voice. "Dave," said Dave. "Nice to meet you, Dave." "I'm Dave," interrupted the ringleader. "Have another drink, mate. You've got some catching up to do." Dave accepted another drink. He was getting frustrated. Those ears were calling to him, but he knew he didn't stand a chance against the lion tamer and his horde. "Can't stay," said Dave. Go. Way out. Where? Ah, you need a guide, the master replied. I know just the guy. He's been here years, knows this place inside and out. Where find? Up there. The master pointed upwards and behind Dave. Dave turned to see, just behind the fire, a massive structure of wood and steel. A skeletal, undulating construction with a peak that seemed miles high. Quickest way would be climb straight up, I reckon. Good luck, mate. Tell him we said hi. The master slapped him on his back. The rest of the group fell quiet. Dave downed his mug of burning fluid, stopped himself from vomiting, steeled himself and approached the cross-hatched edifice. Vertigo had already taken him hold when he'd escaped the shack. This was going to be interesting. But Dave wanted out. He'd had a shit evening, all things considered. What was one more near-death experience? Dave began to climb. He got one Dave length up before looking down and immediately throwing up on himself. He wiped what he could off his front and continued climbing with vomit-greased hands. He ignored the splinters that pierced his fingers, allowing gastric juices to wreak havoc under the skin. As he climbed, he cursed the guy in the hat and his hot play bunny girlfriend and his feral gang. He cursed the two fat twins and their stupid grinning puppet. He cursed the mysterious pothead with too many fucking arms. What a twat. But most of all, he cursed himself for getting himself into this mess and not being able to remember how or why. He seethed the white-hot rage that fueled his ascension to liberation. After an age, he clambered over the ramparts at the top of the structure and stood up. He was met with nothing but a narrow, rickety surface that stretched out left and right, further than he could see, and in front of him, another sheer drop. Booze and piss and adrenaline and vomit and bile and pure, unadulterated fury coursed through his veins and boiled in his skull like soup. Suddenly, Dave could feel the crack in his brain propagate through what used to be his hippocampus, which was why he forgot to scream, and what was easily the most frightening thing he'd ever seen in his life. The stewed grey matter was desperately trying to find a route for his response to this particular stimulus. Fear was a non-starter, and the anxiety nodes were completely shot. Excitement? That particular nexus was at least responsive, but was forced to reroute to its closest functioning cousin, arousal. He had been accosted by a hideous beast of hair and claws and crusted, scaled skin. The beast flapped and screeched and swiped at Dave's face, ripping his cheek to shreds. Dave, fully erect and without hesitation, punched the creature square in the mouth. It stumbled and fell face first to the narrow floor, whereupon Dave, not even stopping to pull the teeth from his fist, ripped off his jeans, mounted the creature, and released the evening's frustrations. As he climaxed, the last synapse holding the two halves of his brain together snapped with a twang. He burbled as he came. Dave rolled off the unconscious mound and lay facing the sky. He could see light creeping over the horizon. He felt nothing, just numb. He stood and looked down at the pathetic, comatose creature. It was time to go. He rolled the dead weight over the mile-high edge, where it fell for what felt like forever until it crashed into the crackling bonfire below. He felt the waft of hot air as the flames swallowed the body. Then he stood on the edge of the precipice and closed his eyes. Feeling the warmth on his face, he jumped after his guide and fell for the rest of his life. It wasn't until a day and a half later that the regional morning news reported 2 deaths at the long derelict site of the old Wonderland amusement park. Police were attempting to identify the bodies, one of which was thought to be of a local homeless man known to frequent the site. Some local youths, spotted fleeing the scene in the early hours of the morning, were being held for questioning, but so far denied any wrongdoing. The local authority was said to be reopening discussions on plans to demolish the site and the remaining structures as a means to tackle persistent drug use. The identity of the second casualty remains unknown.
I'd like to open proceedings by saying that only your story, Ben, didn't contain a theme park or a man ejaculating, so maybe you're wrong.
I feel like I am wrong. I feel like I've failed myself, the podcast, and our audience.
Would it be fair to say
this thought occurred to me while listening to yours, Nick, that mine could be a loose sequel to yours.
Definitely. We now have a. Oh my god! Do we have a tiny bookcase verse?
I'm not happy with this. the two stories that this has sprouted from have been like phantasmagorical horror shows.
So like when you read Adams, you can tell that he's done quite a lot of drugs. It feels like if Adams had written his books while he was on drugs, we would have got what you wrote.
That is probably the highest compliment I've ever received.
You are more than welcome. I really, really enjoy it. Your characterisation, I mean, we already know that that's something you're good at, but it absolutely sold elements of the story. Like the twins were fucking amazing. Really, really good.
The story was fantastic. Absolutely brilliant. I have to admit, at parts of it, I had no idea what the fuck was happening, which is exactly what you're supposed to feel. But I never felt like I wouldn't have put. If I was reading it, I wouldn't have put it down because it was so engaging anyway.
There's all bandersnatches and jabberwops.
Yeah, exactly.
But the idea was that it wasn't immediately obvious that it was anything to do with Wonderland until they mentioned Wonderland, and then you'd have to read it again. I think that was sort of what I was going for.
It does sort of, well, at least in my head, I filtered back through the story, adjusting people and stuff. Yeah. But it was, beautiful description, really nice use of words.
And a solid ramming of the dodo at the end.
Absolutely fucked the shit out of that dodo.
There was different levels, and a lot of this was by accident. There was different. If someone who knows Lewis Carroll back to front would have picked up on stuff, and people who had only seen the film would have picked up on other stuff. Hopefully, I don't know, but there was certainly different layers to it in terms of what was referencing what.
And also, the big elephant in the room is that your performance of that story was also was amazing.
Oh yeah, phenomenal.
Well, I was sort of banking on that more than the writing itself.
Well, the writing itself was great,
super strong, yeah.
But I mean, you've got an incredible voice anyway, and to hear it do the different characters, and I think the one that really got me was when Dave said his name for the first time. I was just like, fuck, Dave.
It was a lot of fun to write. I mean, it's sort of like once we picked the prompt, the theme park seemed the best way to go. It was the most you could do with it, and I was it was loosely inspired by. I don't know if you've ever been to Morecambe.
I have been to
But it was loosely inspired by Frontierland at Morecambe, which all the time I spent in Morecambe was this abandoned sort of Western themed amusement park.
For any Americans listening, imagine like One Flag's Magic Mountain. Yeah. That would be that's like the level we're talking.
Oh dear.
In Detroit.
Disney Ditch. Disney Ditch, England. That's probably a bit of a weird concept to Americans, but like in England we essentially have permanent travelling fun fairs that we either stick on bits of wood jutting half a mile into the sea or in the middle of the Cotswolds or the north. They are the two places that you get them. We've got a couple of big things, like we've got Alton Towers and Thorpe Park and Chessington, but the whole country is littered in these like little attractions. My dad lived in Norfolk for a while, and we travelled back and forth to Essex, and we used to go past this road sign for a place called Gnome Magic. And I've wanted to go for, 22 years now? I don't know what it is. I don't know if
calling
it's a theme park.
Like a home you never had.
Yeah. I also used to do you ever see the road signs where it's like, secret bunker this way?
Yeah.
Now hang on. It's either a secret bunker or you put that sign up. At which point, it's a very public bunker.
Just going back to the story for a brief moment, I think one of my favourite things about it was this industrial hellscape that you painted, because although knowing from Nick's reading of the prompt, we knew that it was it was likely to be a fun fair or the bit where he climbs up that ladder and he's looking down at this burning. I really felt it. I felt I could smell it.
I was hoping there was enough
roller coaster.
Yes, I was hoping there was enough there for your mind's eye to be able to build an image. Because obviously we had constraints in word count and stuff, and I was
Yeah.
worried that I hadn't put enough description in. I was like,
Not at all.
certain things I'd added sort of last minute. Go, actually, there's nothing describing where this is. But,
I think you're right that that's a story that would be benefited from, that people would benefit from reading a second time.
yeah.
Definitely.
Which is the sign of a good short story. Like, if you get everything the first time around, then possibly.
Absolutely. I would also say this is definitely a prompt where if anyone at home has got a story you'd like to write, we could really do some wholesome content for this.
We could use
for
some
this
awesome
prompt.
context for it.
If anyone wants to write something real nice,
Just someone has a really nice day out at a theme park.
yeah.
Meet someone and the family ever.
There's another episode. I actually don't know what the order's going to be for the release,
No.
but where I'd already written before we hit this prompt, a magical world where everything's perfect. So I wanted to avoid that. So it was nice to have another fantastical world because we'd had Ben's, which was really, really anchored in reality, and then mine that was a worse version of reality. So it was nice to get again a worse version,
Complete
but with
detachment.
that fantastical element. It had like kind of a Jim Henson 80s feel to it as well, like a labyrinth kind of thing.
Yeah.
I
I
got from
actually
it.
didn't get that. I had like just pure drug culture.
See, but that's my read on the labyrinth. It feels like she's
Right,
dripped it
okay.
the whole time. The fire dance where they're all taking their heads off and throwing them around and stuff. I got that feeling from the bit around the fire pit
Mm.
until she was a rabbit. She was the Cadbury's caramel bunny.
Lola Bunny.
Oh,
I feel like that one's gonna fucking follow me around, man.
don't call me doll.
But just on the other people writing stories and to the prompts that we're doing, the intention is to start up a place for people to put them.
Yes.
If they do want to do that, because I know we've had some interest from our Patreons and just generally people that are into writing them, whatever they fancy.
Want to show us up?
They want to show us up?
Show us how
Yeah,
it's done.
that's a nice way of doing it. It would be fun to see what everybody else makes of the prompts that we've been doing.
I will almost certainly go out of my way to read most of them as well.
Mm.
I don't just mean I'll read them. I mean I'll read them on mic because I enjoy it, and if you guys are willing to write it for us, hell, we may as well read it for you. So that's Ben shaking his head at me, saying you can do it.
Yeah, all three of us,
We'll get Declan.
write three characters.
Hell yeah.
I would actually pay good money for you to read audiobooks, man. I think you should do it. I think
I'll keep that in mind.
I know you've possibly got a radio future ahead of you, but I think
Early
applying
days,
for like
but we'll
reading
see.
audiobooks would be.
See what happens.
Can you just read us bedtime stories?
I'd love to.
Oh yes, everything is good. Speaking of you reading, what are you reading at the moment?
Well, I'm not really reading anything, not a book per se. So I recently got through. I made it my mission to get through all the Pratchett's. Pratchett's probably my favourite author, one of my favourite authors.
Correct.
And I've been reading him since I was a kid. And I sort of resolved myself, because I'd read bits here and there, and I hadn't gone chronologically through Discworld or anything, and that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to go from start to finish Discworld. I wanted to do all this other stuff, the stuff we did with Stephen Baxter, the Long Earth series.
Yeah.
So that was my plan, and I would read half an hour at my lunch break. And I recently got through all the Pratchett's, every single one, except maybe like Where's My Cow?
What did you make of the Stephen Baxter stuff? Because I've not actually read it. I've only read the Discworld stuff.
I enjoyed it. Yeah, it was actually recommended to me by my stepdad. I think I read an excerpt that was like in the back of one of the Discworld books or something. I'd read like a sample. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. And then like a year later, my stepdad texted me going, "Have you read the Long Earth series? It's really good." I was like, "Oh no, I haven't. I read a little clip, but it seemed cool." And he just mailed me the whole box set.
Oh wow.
Which is really cool. And so I got through those. And that was a really, really cool concept. Not perfect, but definitely worth a read.
Do you feel like that about Good Omens? Like it's really fun and an amazing book, but the clear seams between Gaiman writing and Pratchett writing, they're really evident.
Helps if you like them both.
Well, if you do like them both, then it's fine. Which is obviously
So we're all
like,
fine.
yeah. But it's very clear that it's been written by two different people. Whereas I've read books before that have been written by two different people, and you can't tell.
I've always been curious how that works.
My understanding is that they would write a section each and they started to lose who'd written what, and I don't understand how they could even do that, because they write in such distinct voices that
You want to let's do it? You want me and you to write a book together?
But we only. I mean, that's a game people play, isn't it? Or it could be a game where someone writes a chapter and then you're given the last line of the chapter or something. And you write the next.
I think people have been doing it for a long time. Like I read a book ages ago called I think it was called Hard to Be a God or something. It's by these Russian authors called they were brothers, Strugatsky brothers, I think their name was, and they wrote it in sort of in letters. They were sending versions of the book to each other, and they would add a chapter and send it, add a chapter and send it back, add a chapter.
I mean, you could argue, even to a point though, it's like, say, a lot of Tolkien's stuff, it was him telling it to his children.
Yeah.
And it's his wife's notes then being reinterpreted into a book by him. So in a sense, that's being written by 4 people, because he had 2 kids reminding him of plot points that he'd forgotten.
He'd forgotten them, hadn't he? And
like,
that's what drove him to start writing it down, wasn't it? Because
collaborative writing.
Otherwise, they were going to keep poking holes in his bloody reading. And so I heard the other day that she really didn't like him referring to them as Beren and Luthien. You know, he had this real fantastical idea that they were theirs was this big love, and the Silmarillion is filled with this love story. It's sort of the centre point of the thing. And she died before he did, and he put on their headstones like Beren and Luthien. But it wasn't something that she was into, and I don't know how apocryphal that is, but it just put like a slight nasty little twist on the Tolkien.
Don't put a nasty twist.
I've got to inject a bit of realism into your fantasy, Nick.
So back to what I'm reading.
No,
that's going to peak so hard.
So that's what you're reading now. You're working through it.
What I'm reading now, because I finished that a few months ago, but I wanted to. I obviously want to keep half an hour on my lunch break to do some reading. What I fancied doing, because I know a lot of our friend group read comic books, and I've never read a comic book until recently, and it sounded really interesting. The way you've got characters and universes that were sort of well established, but all kinds of different stuff can happen depending on who's writing and what series you're in, and this, that, and the other. So it sounded something like I wanted to try out because it seemed fun. And I'm also a massive Star Wars fan. So sorry for bringing Star Wars up.
It's every episode.
Every episode.
I'm fairly sure it's every
episode. We've not made one yet.
Yeah. So what I thought I would do was I would go through some of the extended universe for Star Wars, and I had the idea of going through all the comic books in chronological order in the universe. So starting,
you've made a mistake.
Really, probably but it's just it seems like I don't know, but I'm enjoying it so far. I'm into the sort of Old Republic period now.
Yeah.
And I know it's controversial, but see, I like the idea of exploring the universe and how it evolves over time from sort of within the universe.
Yeah.
Is this all the stuff that got deleted when they?
Yeah, it's now Legends.
It's now not
canon.
Star Wars Legends.
It's not canonical.
My favourite Star Wars character is over there in Legends.
Oh, it's
Dash Rendar.
Dash Rendar, yes.
Dash Rendar from the book Shadow of the Empire.
I bought you a shirt. I had a shirt made for you a few years ago that says Dash Rendar always shoots first. So that's what you're reading right now. But what is, if you had to, this is a hard question, by the way, the best book you've ever read?
Oh, Christ, difficult. I mean, it depends what you mean by best, because you can get into
your
debates on subjectivity, objectivity.
Your definition.
This is the thing. I mean, my favourite book is Mort by Terry Pratchett. Whether that's even the best Discworld book, I think is up for debate.
No, Nightwatch is what you're looking for there.
Case in point. So
yeah,
that's just Pratchett fans, man.
So for you, why is that your favourite Discworld?
A lot of it is about the characters involved, how heavy it is on death, and what he gets up to, and the sort of this plane above the Discworld that they flip between, and all the sort of stuff that goes on there. And it really spoke. I sort of read it first when I was about 10, and that was my main introduction to the character of Death. And Death as a character is the main thing that grabbed me.
Was it your first Discworld book, or? I
think so. Which is funny because the first, maybe it is sort of the first time you always remember your first time.
I think I read Light Fantastic first.
See, my
accidentally.
First one was Colour of Magic, and it put me off Discworld.
Yeah.
And then I came back. It was actually Mort that brought me back in.
Well, I've heard this a lot.
The first two
are sort of him getting into the groove, and he's not quite there yet. And by the time he gets
4 books in,
yeah.
he's well.
Well,
in
it's
stride.
pure parody in the
Yeah.
first 2 Rincewind. It's just pure. There's nothing to it. There's no meat on the bone.
No.
Little bits of world building, but it's actually by the end of the Discworld series, it's all world building.
Mm.
Vimes is on steam trains and everything's kicking off.
Yeah.
I know people didn't love it, but I really enjoyed Raising Steam.
Yeah.
I loved that Discworld was taking a technological jump. For me, that was a really big moment.
Hugely.
Same as with the Clax Towers going up. It was just cool to see this world
Evolving.
growing.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
evolving.
It was the first of the Discworlds that I read sort of immediately after it was written as well.
Yeah.
Which was, I was like, I'm caught up.
But Mort is a fantastic book. It's
Yeah.
also it's quite, none of them are particularly long, but it's quite a slender book as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
So-
you can read it in a day.
It's highly accessible and really, really well written. And I know, at least for me, that was the first time I'd really seen the personification of something like death
Yes.
in anything, in any media. It was a totally different experience to reading.
But it's
reading
like
this
I love it for what's in it, but whether I'd call it the best, I don't know, because Monstrous Regiments I also really love, and I think that it's kind of cleverer. So if I was to talking about the skill of writing, I think Pratchett still developed that skill beyond Mort and put more in, and I think there are probably better Discworld books than Mort.
So I'm gonna.
But it's still my favourite. But even outside of Discworld, it's hard for me to say whether Mort or any of the Discworld books are the best books I've ever read when I've read Hitchhiker's Guide and things like that. And then people might argue because I've also read bloody To Kill a Mockingbird, and people rave about that because it's an incredibly important piece of literature. Is it the best? Is maybe back in the day it was. Maybe not so much now. Who knows?
I'm gonna say this on mic now, and I'll say if enough people drop us a tweet, which is @BookcaseTiny, I think it would be a really cool thing to do a short run series where the 3 of us read in order the Discworld books and have a chat about each one afterwards. So if we can get enough support, if I think you people deserve it, show me that you want it.
Well,
And I'll coerce these people.
do we deserve to be the people who deliver that? Is it, what gives us the right?
What gives us the right? Nothing, and that's why I'm going to take it by
Well,
force.
if no one's done it, we're all massive.
I'm going to flex pretty hard, actually. I wrote my master's dissertation on Terry Pratchett.
Oh well,
So
there you go.
So you're qualified.
Yeah, we actually
I'm
have
literally
a qualified.
qualified.
Yeah, well, I cried when I read that thing when Pratchett passed away, and it was like within 30 minutes, someone had written a piece about death coming to collect him,
Yeah.
and I was at work, and someone sent me it, and I was managing a Games Workshop at the time, so selling little plastic soldiers to people, and in front of a room full of nerds. I wept like an infant. But that's not only our connection to Pratchett, but like that ingrained lore of death as a character. Like when you start reading Discworld books and multiple Discworld books, you understand each character's role, and they all have an important part to play. And it means that if you see those capital letters show up in a Discworld book, you know exactly what's happening.
Well, this is it. I'm always, fuck yeah, we're getting some death. Which
Yeah.
out of context
We're
sounds really
heading
bad.
We're heading into the trouser legs of time.
just on the where were you when he died sort of thing, because it did feel for me, at least in the literary world, like that was a real moment where I was like, it was a snapshot of what was happening.
Yeah.
I was halfway through writing that dissertation, so
Oh,
I had to change the tenses of everything
Oh.
to like him being a past author, and it also killed my enthusiasm for writing it because it went from being something that was a live, breathing thing that although he was very ill and it wasn't going to be that long and all the rest of it. It was deep. Obviously, the whole situation was incredibly sad.
Yeah.
But there was still work coming out, and we knew that like the Shepherd's Crown hadn't been released yet, and there was more to come. So it went from being a live, breathing thing, as I say, to being something that had ended. It had a finite end.
Yeah.
So from like a purely selfish point, it really screwed my my enthusiasm for this dissertation, because I didn't want to write about how my favourite author had died.
Yeah.
That's not something that I wanted to do.
Right, we could do hundreds of hours of this, and will, if you guys make us. So, I'm going to move it on. This is, I think, easier, but you might find harder.
What's the worst book you have ever read?
I mean, I like reading, but I probably haven't read nearly as many books as you guys have. So, as far as I can remember, there's only 3 books that I've ever not finished.
Okay.
One, no fault of the book, as far as I remember, it was Wit by Ian Banks. And the only reason I was reading it was because I was on holiday. I was thoroughly bored, and my mother had just finished it. She was like, "Oh, read this." So I sort of got a few chapters in, and then the holiday ended, and I just never picked it up again. The second is War of the Worlds.
My heart.
It gets worse. The reason I didn't finish it is because it was the only book I've ever fallen asleep while reading. But I was reading it for a school thing, and I think we needed to have it read by the next day, and I was still up at 1 a.m. reading it, and it just conked out. But I'd enjoyed the first half, and then I think I got as far as there was a soldier or something, and he was wandering around.
Artilleryman.
Yeah, stuff like that. I think just my brain decided, we've had the good bit, so off I went.
So you don't know, but I'm here in Cambridge. We're recording the podcast all together, and I've actually come up for my co-host Ben's birthday, and one of his presents was a nice copy of War of the Worlds, and you've just told him how terrible it is.
No, I'm sure it's fantastic. I was a kid. I was a tired child, and I was probably too young to really appreciate it at the time.
And your third.
My third, the only book I got partway through and actively decided to stop reading, potentially make me very unpopular, was Philip Pullman's The Subtle Knife.
Okay.
So, I'd read The Northern Lights.
Yep.
Enjoyed it. I was probably, 14, 15 at the time-ish.
Yeah.
Picked up the second one. I got halfway through,
Oh, yes.
and I think it was when the Angels turned up that I checked out.
Also, confusingly, I think they have different names in the States.
The first one's called the Golden Compass in
Yeah.
America,
Right.
even though it's an alethiometer, not a compass.
Yeah.
Which already...
Nerd!
Same as the Sorcerer's Stone, though, isn't it? Because apparently the concept of philosophy is foreign to the Americas.
There's a bit in the Subtle Knife where they're using it to sort of cut into other dimensions.
Yeah.
And they end up in like a really quiet, hot town.
Yeah.
It's a bit, I haven't read these books since I was a kid, but I remember being deeply bored by that section.
They're living in... It's like an abandoned Ibiza.
Right, yeah.
So it's the pocket dimension that Lyra walks into at the end of the first book. I haven't read them in 15 years, and I remember this really clearly. And Will also ends up there.
Yeah.
And they just live there for a bit, and there's an ice cream place, and they eat some ice cream, and it's all very nice. But that
was probably why it was boring.
Strange, yeah. But like the bit when they rob the house by slipping in and out of dimensions, and okay, we need to walk 4 paces and come back in. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
But you didn't read the third one.
No.
There's a race. The scientist ends up on a planet. I can't remember the character's name, but she ends up on this planet or dimension with these things that apparently look like elephants, but they have like one leg is like a thumb and the other end's like a big claw thing, like a hook. And then they put it in fruit and they go around like motorbikes on these round ass fruit. And as a kid, I just...
You making this up?
No, I have such an active imagination and I could not put this image together. I was like, what? And my favourite character, again, we're going to do spoilers for old stuff. Lee Harper, who's the like cowboy balloon man, the first one, whose demon is a hare. Died in the first one, and I was like, oh, it's one of my 2 characters that I love gone. And then Yorick, who's the bear, the armoured polar bear, is also like, okay, I'm Audi 5k. I was like, oh, the 2 guys are like well, I guess I'll finish the trilogy anyway. Oh, what's with the motorbike elephants? And if you don't believe me, look it up.
I won't.
But we can actually bounce off that one onto the next question, which is, have you got a favourite literary character? I think we may already know who it is.
Yeah, I think it's... Well, there's 2 schools of thought for me for this. One of them is obviously Death from Discworld. As a kid, I had quite a sort of morbid imagination and sense of humour, and I don't know how much of this was to do with Death, the character from Discworld, but he kind of spoke to me on a level that I found very interesting, very comforting, particularly, getting a bit personal here, but I
lost my dad when I was a kid, and it wasn't soon after that I started reading Mort.
Yeah.
And there was something incredibly comforting about reading the personification of death in the way that Pratchett had written him. He's an incredibly badass character, effortlessly badass, but also sort of has foibles and vulnerabilities. But all in all, his kind of calling card is the way he delivers the souls to the next realm or whatever. And it was such a comfort to me to think about death being this character at the time, and so that probably informed the way that I see him and the way that I appreciate it. But also, as we said before, those capital letters come up, and it's like we're going to get something good. It's either going to be some badassery or some great wisdom or whatever.
It's that great moment in The Fifth Elephant when Vimes is in the boat heading towards the waterfall, and Death appears and just admits that he's kind of bored of turning up for Vimes because he just keeps nearly dying.
Yeah.
And from like Vimes, as I said in our first episode, is my favourite lit character. So that moment, that two of, for me, the strongest characters in this world, just really showing what death is like. I have to be here, but come on.
They bind a few times, don't they? Because in Thud, he appears in the waterfall section as well. Oh, lovely.
There's another character that I like it for a similar reason, but it's totally different, and it's not technically a book; it's a graphic novel. But Rorschach from the Watchmen series, I also find really interesting and love reading him. And the similarity with him and Death is that he's this badass character that you discover has vulnerabilities and foibles and stuff. And it's the same sort of thing that he's so cool as when he's being cool. Like even when other characters are talking about him, he sounds cool. Like when Night Owl says, "This guy wanted me to hurt him," and I said no, and Rorschach dropped him down an elevator shaft. And it's like, yes, it's perfect. And then it turns out he's wearing platform shoes, and
there's obviously a fairly clear delineator between those two characters, which is feral misanthropy. Which is extreme in Rorschach.
Yes.
Both excellent characters, though.
Oh, yeah. So Watchmen's actually a good turning point for this, because obviously that was turned into a film, and then I'm told, I haven't seen, a far better director's cut of that film.
I haven't seen it, no.
No, I don't think so.
But that's Watchmen that I'm referring to. But if you could turn any book or comic or whatever into another medium, what would you adapt?
I'm being greedy here because there's always two that spring to mind.
I did it in the first episode as well, man.
Am I the only one who hasn't broken this bloody rule?
I mean, I'm kind of loath to bring up Harry Potter, but I know there's been many video games of Harry Potter, but none of them have been very good.
That's extremely true.
But I'd be quite interested to try like a proper, full immersive Skyrim-esque RPG where you start off. I don't know. You give them what your character's like, and then you receive your Hogwarts letter, and then you get your sorting hat, and then you go through and sort of do missions that are classes or whatever. I'm sure that there's a lot going on in Harry Potter that could make quite a fun RPG.
There was a Harry Potter VR RPG a bit like that.
Was there?
It might be worth you checking it out.
Well, there was something on the Connect, wasn't there, where you could wave a wand around or something.
But yeah, I think I could get my teeth into that. A big open world thing as well, where you could go to the different schools of magic. You could also be in the Muggle world and having to like disguise yourself a little bit.
And there'd be replayability as well. You could play as a Gryffindor, and then you could choose it to be as a Slytherin and end up as a Death Eater or whatever. All kinds of different.
It'd be more fun to set it like pre-Voldemort. Early days of Hogwarts stuff might be good. There are still dragons knocking about, and the line between Muggles and wizards is more that they'll burn you if they find you. Era.
I mean, you could even go like full GTA, and you just be like cursing Muggles, and the auras come after you and shit. Maybe. But the other one, because we mentioned before, the Long Earth trilogy. Yeah, not trilogy. There's 5. What's the trilogy for 5?
Quintology?
Trilogy,
unless
tetralogy.
Unless it's Hitchhiker's Guide, in which case 5 is still a trilogy.
Trilogy in 5 parts. Yeah. But there's brilliant imagery in the Long Earth series. There's some
I'll try not to give too much away, but it revolves around jumping into different dimensions, and as the title suggests, Long Earth. There's lots of different Earths, and some are subtly different, some are really different, and then they have this way of jumping between them, and they have this way of jumping between really fast, and they describe the way that the landscape shifts like a film, because they're jumping so fast that it's like 24 frames per second or whatever. And all the different worlds they describe, and the different creatures, and the different races, and just the imagery of flitting between worlds, I think would look really cool. And I think we're at that level where the technology, the CGI technology, could make that look fantastic.
So do you want to do it as a movie?
So I think
Series movie.
Which
one's got more money now?
You couldn't. I don't think you could do it in one movie. Maybe a movie each, because the books, there's 5 books, and they follow the protagonist. In the first book, he's a teenager, and the last book, he's an old man. So it stretches off a huge period of time.
In this golden era of TV.
So I'm thinking
big money HBO.
a TV adaptation could be really good. Of that.
Anyone you'd want in it? Apart from obviously yourself.
He's playing all the roles, Eddie Murphy style.
Well, when I read the first one, the main character he's a 15-year-old lad who's described as sort of slightly, I think he's American with Italian heritage, and I imagined him played by Ben Whishaw, who plays Q in the latest James Bond films, the young lad.
Oh, yeah.
You've got spots, my complexion is highly relevant. That guy, so that's who I had in my mind as a kid, but beyond that, there's a gorilla in it, kind of, but not a gorilla.
Gonna cast Harambe, isn't it?
So,
R.I.P. Harambe.
Jumping back to books, when did you last... This one's possibly hard, depending on how in touch with emotions you are. When was the last time that you cried whilst reading a book?
I have never cried while reading a book. Not for want of trying.
Okay, go on, unpack that one for me.
I've also never cried while watching a film or anything.
Really?
Yeah, never.
Or killing a man.
Yeah. I know.
So what's going on there?
This is not me trying to be, a macho. This is something I really struggle to do.
Right.
But in terms of getting emotional in a book, we hit on Pratchett passing away. When I was reading The Shepherd's Crown, which is the last book in the Discord series, massive spoilers ahead.
You just checking. You've read it now, right?
No. It's upstairs.
So this is actually a sore point because
I don't want it to end.
Nick doesn't want it to end.
Well,
so
this is it. I mean, this ties into sort of what I'm saying. There is. When I was reading it, there were moments when I could tell that Pratchett wasn't well. There was elements in it. It wasn't obvious, he was still in fine sort of writing form, but there were elements where, that's Pratchett struggling there. And there was also, I picked up on the way it was written was Pratchett knowing he was writing his last book. So that sort of combined with that was like, oh God. And then part of the story that he writes was also emotional on top of that. There's a great character in it, which something happens to that it's like, oh, for fuck's sake. And that hit home. And then when I read The Shepherd's Crown, this was at the end, for me, of a 20-year-long journey to read all the Pratchetts. So this whole thing culminated in me reading this last book. And I've been hacking away at it for 20 years. And I was following Pratchett in his life and his illness. And this was the end, not of just of that journey, but of this series and of my favourite author. And it did hit home. And it was a tremendous kick in the chest.
No tears.
I certainly felt emotional.
Did it come close?
Not really. There are films that have come closer. But
okay. Like,
what's the closest?
Yeah, I'm interested to know what's the closest.
I mean, I did almost get emotional on a train listening to the original Broadway recording of Cats.
Is that Mr. Mistopheles? It's so magical.
It's only like the 800th time I listened to it. I really love Cats. I don't know why. It's just really fun. But there's something about it. I think it was a way that I was in a rut at the time. I was not in the best place at the time, and I was coming back from somewhere. And I have it on my phone. I'm just, I'll just listen to some cats.
No, but anything can hit you at that.
Yeah, it's when that's kind of happening.
You could have used that to answer the last question.
Oh, quite
I'll tell you what,
possibly,
no, before you get to that.
Yeah, go on.
You know Click, the Adam Sandler film?
Yes,
Yeah.
I know. The reason I know that is because Kate Beckinsale is the love interest in that, and she is amazing.
It's very good.
Please continue.
But the bit when Adam Sandler is an old man and he's dying on the tarmac in the rain, with
Yeah.
all his family around him, they actually did that scene really well. And
Oh.
it was like, if you didn't know it was an Adam Sandler film,
Tell you what, Old Man Pain gets me every
Yeah.
time. I watched Saving Private Ryan for the first time the other day.
not seen that yet.
Well, this isn't a spoiler because it happens in the first
30 seconds.
30 seconds. But it's an old war veteran walking through a cemetery, and I assume in France.
Yeah.
And you know, like at I could forget the names of the different cemeteries and stuff now, but they just stretch on into the distance. All these little white headstones to mark all the soldiers that fell. And because I visited a couple of them when I was younger, I had this real sensory memory about it. And also, there's like an old man crying about the people that he lost in the war, and I was already bawling.
See,
I was just in floods of tears.
I went on a school trip to Belgium, and we went to look at stuff from really both wars, but mostly the First World War. So, we went to Flanders Fields, but we went to a couple of these graveyards, and the weight of the loss is like a physical thing. Like, you can actually...
It's geography.
You just
It's what it
get
is.
the sense of, like, each one of these white dots that stretch beyond what you can see. That was bad enough. And then our tour guide said, and of course, on the other side of the road, there are mass graves of people whose names they didn't know to put on the stones. And I just got, I couldn't actually put it together in my, we're quite liberal here. I think it's fair to say that, we write stories and read them to each other and drink beer and talk about books. We're fairly arty liberal types. The idea of that sort of government enforced loss is so bewildering to me. I actually just can't comprehend the numbers.
Yeah.
You read about the Somme, and I just cannot put that together in my brain.
It's easy to listen and read about history and forget that it happened.
Yeah.
You can feel like fiction, and then when you go and see something, this is part of what, because I quite enjoy history and historical stories and games and things, but I have to remind myself that this happened. But when you see relics and things from when it happened, it really helps to hit it home.
Yeah.
I visited there's a Holocaust museum in Washington DC that I visited many years ago, and it was like that. And you get that when you see like a shoe, when there's this mass pile of shoes, or you see an actual artifact, and you get that sort of sting.
Oh.
There's like tinnitus in the whole body.
Yeah.
It's kind of,
Not to continue this downer bit, but when I was in Boston, they have a very, very small Holocaust memorial there, and it's a walk in a little park, and it has these fairly large glass chambers that stretch up maybe 30 feet, and the names of some of the people that died are inscribed in it. And as you walk, start to go through some of these like glass, they're like glass archways. As you walk through it, there are grates underneath your feet, and I felt like this was possibly in bad taste, release like a smoke. It was, and I was just walking through it, and I was just like, holy shit, how is this?
It's not really on.
Yeah. It didn't it was absolutely fucking horrendous, and it just struck me like right in the stomach. I was like,
it wasn't actually Zyklon B.
Maybe that's why I felt so ill.
Yeah.
No, but it was horrendous. I was having a nice walk around in Boston, because there's a lovely tour that you can do in Boston where you walk around all the historical points. This is sort of on that walk, and it was just, as you say, like, you can't even comprehend the loss.
No, Charlie, who's the drummer in Dead Man's Whiskey, which is my band, has come up before, but his dad is retired now, but he was a firefighter, and they were telling me about that. So he is the nicest, most cheerful bloke you've ever met, and it's because he's been conditioned to walk into buildings that are on fire and hopefully bring people out. He was in the second response team for Grenfell.
Shit.
Which was a massive disaster here in the UK. You might not know about it in the US if you're listening. But it was an apartment block that caught fire, and a lot of people perished. And, like, he went to that, and yeah, it affected him. It was upsetting, but it didn't snap anything.
No.
But they went to Ground Zero,
Mm.
and he said that, you go through this museum that's showing you bits of fire truck and the names of all these firefighters who passed away, and apparently it's just it's like an emotional lodestone around your neck. You just can't you can't quite comprehend it, even when you're looking at the actual numbers, and they don't make sense, because how could they? And we need to cheer up this podcast.
We desperately need
Declan,
to bring it up.
my sweet darling, tell me one really uninteresting or disinteresting fact.
No. So just the background on that one is that I have been bollocked by an audience member for saying disinteresting facts about it.
So please tell us a disinteresting fact
I love
about you,
that.
please,
I
Declan.
love that level of pedantry. There you go. There's my disinteresting.
That is not disinteresting.
I mean, do you want something entirely mundane, or something that could be interesting if it wasn't so uninteresting? Like, I could just say I'm nearly 30 and I can't drive, which is obviously not very interesting.
So why? What led to that?
Because I'm an absolute cheapskate and it costs a lot of money.
It does cost a lot of money.
It does cost it, but would you not be saving money in the long run?
Not really. I cycle everywhere.
Well, that is. It's even less interesting because you live in the Cambridge area and everyone cycles everywhere.
But it's also rooted in what I would say is borderline a character trait for you, which is that you are really good at saving money.
That's a very nice way of putting it.
We lived together for a little while, didn't we?
We did.
And you
And you still owe me £100.
Can I act on it? Sorry.
Oh shit!
What do I
Debt
owe you £100 for?
Because I was the one who was receiving the bills from British Gas, and you'd already moved out by the time the last bill came in.
So I didn't. Because
How
I wasn't there.
How long ago was this?
We'd all
8
moved
years?
out, but you'd already left.
8 years.
Yeah.
Pay the man.
You can buy me a drink, it'll be fine.
Apparently I can buy you about 20 drinks.
Well, we're in Cambridge,
You've
so
got
maybe,
5.
yeah, 5 drinks.
Come back to London with me, I'll get you 2.
Oh, no, but I remember going around when we were students and stuff, going around supermarkets, and you would know the best ABV to penny ratio of every alcohol in the shop.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a 3 Hammer strong cider, which you could only get in B&M bargains.
That is an interesting thing.
No, I'm sorry.
It's become interesting. It's fantastic.
I once had a very brief conversation with Prince Charles about embroidery.
Was he complimenting you on yours? Or?
Where were you?
I was in Kirby Lonsdale in Cumbria. He was visiting. We had a market on.
He was visiting because you had a market on.
Well, yeah,
I thought he had people for that.
Yeah. No, it was just I'd left school at this point. There were a lot of school kids all around, and shaking hands and stuff. And I just happened to be stood in this stall that happened to be selling like embroidery stuff. So he came and he was checking out all the stalls, and the woman who owned the stall was explaining this, that, and the other. And I was sort of stood there. And he turned to me and, "Do you like embroidery then?" And I'm like, "Love it."
So what your fact actually is you lied to a member of the royal family.
Yeah, well, that's not even the worst part, because my mother was there, and she sort of ushered me away because she noticed that a security guy was getting very close to me because I was wearing a very long jacket that could quite easily
have a knife or
hide a couple of AK-47s.
Oh, AK-47s! Wow, okay.
So she was like, "These guys think you're about to assassinate the chap, so you better go."
Bloody hell!
Do you like embroidery? Aye, I do. Oh, well, Declan, you have been a delight. In spite of the temperature, it has been an absolute pleasure being in this sweatbox with you.
I could not think of a better sauna to be in.
Exactly. It's been lovely. I loved your story, man, and loved talking to you about everything.
And I'm hoping anyone who's on our Patreon, we are going to have some special extra stuff with Declan. So keep an ear out. We'll get some of that out for you.
The big man himself.
We will have the man, the myth, the legend that is our wonderful our wonderful guest, Declan Khan. Our wonderful Declan Khan. Here he is, Declan. I'm going to say some quick thank yous. Big thank yous to our 3 toppest of top Patreons, who are Matthew McLaren, Gary Laird, and Scott Byrne. You are continuing to help us make this podcast. We love you all very, very much.
I love you, Matt.
You do know that, don't you?
Yes.
You do. Fantastic.
Legend.
Should we hand it back to the wizard?
Back to the wizard.
My, what an adventure. You'll have to come back another time. Our adventurers are off now in search of more stories. If you'd like to meet our adventuring party, you can reach them by Raven at Bookcase Tiny. Or, alternatively, you can help them on Patreon to fund their adventures. Those tavern ales don't pay for themselves, I'm afraid. But thank you for joining us. Now get out of my wizard tower. I have wizardy things to do. Bloody do-good as always coming round here wanting something